In our current series, we are talking about people in the Bible who responded to God's call to do something that was scary. In case you didn't know, these are just normal, everyday people who are doing amazing things because God said to do them, and they said yes. They said, let's go. So that's why this series is called Let's Go. Donovan kicked off our series 2 weeks ago. He talked about Abraham, and he talked about God's call to Abraham required faith. It required him to step out because he didn't know where he was supposed to go. He just knew that he was supposed to go and that God would go with him. So he just moved forward in faith, trusting God to show him the way. Well, tonight we're going to take a look at an amazing woman in Scripture, Esther. God gave Esther a call that required courage, a lot more than just stepping off of the platform for the zip line. Esther's story is incredible. Hers is probably one of the most incredible stories of bravery in the Bible. And it's such a big deal that even to this day, the story of Esther is celebrated annually during a Jewish festival called Purim. They've got parades, they've got parties, they've got costumes, they give gifts, and there's even an interactive reading of the story of Esther, the whole book of Esther, where they boo every time Haman, who's the villain, every time his name is spoken. So we're gonna dig into the story of Esther tonight, but just to kind of set the stage, to give you a little bit of background, Esther was a young Jewish woman. And I say young, meaning like she was probably in her teens. So let that be your perspective. This is you guys. She was orphaned when her parents died, and she was adopted by her cousin Mordecai. So we have Esther, we have Mordecai, and then we have King Xerxes. King Xerxes had just banished his queen because she wouldn't do something that he told her to do at a party. So he was just like, be gone. I will find myself a new queen. So he's looking for a new queen, and he gathers together 400 women. And out of those 400 women, he chooses Esther to be his queen. All right, in just a moment, we're going to pick up in chapter 3. But first, there's someone else you need to know, and that's this villain. That's Haman. He hated Mordecai. That's Esther's adoptive father. Haman had been promoted to a high position in the government by the king, and Mordecai refused to pay him respect. And so he wouldn't bow down and honor him, so Haman didn't like him. All right, so let's go ahead and look at Esther chapter 3. If you could pull up that slide. And don't forget to boo every time we say the name Haman, okay? Boo. Just like that, yes. All right, so when Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down or show him respect, he was filled with rage. He learned of Mordecai's nationality, so he decided it was not enough to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Instead, he looked for a way to destroy all the Jews throughout the entire empire of Xerxes. Then Haman approached King Xerxes and said, "There is a certain race of people scattered through all the provinces of your empire who keep themselves separate from everyone else. Their laws are different from those of any other people. They refuse to obey the laws of the king. So it is not in the king's interest to let them live. If it pleases the king, issue a decree that they will be destroyed. And I will give 10,000 large sacks of silver to the government administrators to be deposited in the royal treasury." The king agreed, confirming his decision by removing his signet ring from his finger and giving it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, and the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. The king said, "The money and the people are both yours to do as you see fit." So obviously, Haman's not a good guy. Yeah, we don't have to do that every time now, okay? Just for the story, all right? Because it's going to get a little overdone. Okay, so Haman's not a good guy. He hates Mordecai so much that he is willing to commit genocide. He is willing to kill all of the Jewish people in the kingdom. And because the king is cruel and selfish, he goes along with Haman's plan, but he's totally clueless that this impacts his own wife, the queen. This is signing a death warrant for his own queen. So Haman decrees, he sends his decrees around announcing that everyone must kill any Jewish person, young, old, men, women, children. And when they did, then they could take all their stuff of anybody that they killed. They would keep their possessions. Esther had no idea that this decree was going out, but Mordecai did. Esther found out that Mordecai was grieving, so she sent one of her attendants, Hatak, to find out what was wrong. All right, so we'll jump to chapter 4. We have a slide. Mordecai gave Hatak a copy of the decree issued in Susa that called for the death of all Jews. He asked Hatak to show it to Esther and explain the situation to her. He also asked Hatak to direct her to go to the king and beg for mercy and plead for her people. Then Esther told Hatak to go back, relay the message to Mordecai. All of the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. And the king has not called for me to come for 30 days. So Esther's like, you think I have more influence than what I actually have. The king hasn't wanted to see me for a month, and if I go, he'll put me to death. She was not exaggerating. This was very, very real danger. She could be banished, but more, she could be killed for displeasing the king. All right, let's carry on in our slides here. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment, because you're in the palace, you will escape when all the other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will rise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this. So what Mordecai said is actually one of the most famous lines in Scripture. This is often quoted, and you've probably heard this before. He said, who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this. All right, let's carry on. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go and gather all of the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. Then, though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. If I must die, I must die. So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. If I must die, I must die. That's a lot of courage. So I'm not going to spoil it for you. The next 6 chapters chronicle Esther's incredible story, and you should go and read it this week. All I'm going to say is that she risks everything to save her people. And Haman, you can do it now. You can do it now. Yeah. Well, things don't go so well for him, but I'm not going to tell you what happens either. I want you to go read it. Go finish the rest of Esther this week. What we want to focus on tonight is Esther's courage that allowed God to do something really amazing through her. We can learn a lot from the way that Esther answered God's call. And the first thing is that God's call often requires courage. Esther is celebrated to this day because of her courage. And while we'll never find ourselves in this exact situation, God's call on each of our lives will require courage. Whether that's to take a stand when you know that something is wrong, or to speak out on behalf of someone else. Maybe it's to just share your faith. That takes courage. Maybe it's just doing the right thing when you're tempted to do otherwise. God's call requires courage. Now, like I said earlier, you might look at Esther's story and you think, of course she was brave. She was a person in the Bible, and I'm nothing like her. But the truth is, you are. You are. She was afraid to take this challenge, which is why she tried to say no at first. In fact, there are so many heroes in the Bible that were afraid and said no. And it's exactly why God would say over and over again, be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. We see that all throughout the Bible. God is encouraging us to have courage, to be courageous, to do the things that he's asking us to do. All right, so that's the first thing. God's call often requires courage. And then the second thing is courage comes through prayer. So when Esther committed to following God's call, what did she tell the people to do? Did I hear it? She told him to, I hear whispering. It's okay to say it. Fast, yes. It's okay to say it, yes. She called her people to fast. She commanded Mordecai to gather everyone and to fast. It's a practice of giving up something in order to focus on prayer. So for 3 days, they chose not to eat or drink anything so that they could spend that time in prayer. And Esther did the same thing. So in this critical moment, this pivotal moment of her life, when so many other lives were at stake and even her own, Esther and all of her people just took time to pray, to shift their focus on the situation, to shift their focus from what was lying before them, which was a big deal. But they took the time to just focus on God in prayer. They asked for courage. They asked for strength. They asked for God to use Esther to save their people. We don't just find courage within ourselves. We can't just muster up enough courage to do great and mighty things for God. It has to come to us through him, through prayer. And as we take time to continually turn our thoughts and our hearts to God in prayer, it shifts our focus. When we begin to see God's priorities and know what is important, then we know how we're called to respond. To be clear, prayer doesn't eliminate fear, right? Sometimes we have to step forward even when we still feel afraid. I know so many stories again and again in the Bible and then even in my friend groups and in my own life. Sometimes you just have to do it scared. But what matters most is following God's call. So it's worth it to pray for that courage and then to step out and do it. All right, and the third thing that we see in this story is that doing something is better than doing nothing. All right, so what do I mean by this? So Mordecai said something really incredible to Esther. He challenged her to follow God's call. He says, if you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place. God's going to do it, but he's inviting you to be a part of it. Are you going to be a part of it? Because perhaps you're made queen for such a time as this. He essentially said, God's going to do it with or without you. Right? We all know that God has a mission in this world. His mission is to seek and save the lost, to rescue people back to him. That's his mission, and he's going to do it with or without us. But would you rather live a life of responding to God's call and be a part of that than look back on your life and regret the steps that you didn't take? I know what I would choose. I know I would rather take the steps and do it afraid than to look back and wish that I'd done it differently. All right, so how do we do it? How do we do that? How do we live a life of courageous action like Esther did? Here are some steps that we can take. The first one is obviously to pray for courage. All right? Seems easy enough, but we want to make it a regular part of our prayer time. Pray for courage. I know sometimes it's like, okay, what should I pray for? What should I talk to God about today? If you're not sure, pray for courage. For whatever it is that he asks you. Ask him to give you wisdom to see what it is that he's calling you to see, and the courage then to follow through. David expressed this prayer in a psalm. He said, but when I am afraid, I will put my trust in you. I find that really encouraging because there's so many times where I feel afraid. And it's easier just to say no. Somebody else will do that. Let somebody else do that. They're better at that than I would be. but it's about trusting in God to do it, not trusting in myself to do it. And I am guilty of defaulting to that. So in those moments of fear, time and time again, we see people in the Bible who did things afraid, just putting their trust in God, praying to him and putting one step in front of the next. All right, another step you can take is to pray for awareness. So we want to pray for courage. We want to pray for awareness. Do you know why people all around the world celebrate Esther year after year and century after century? Because at some point, everyone can relate to Esther. If you are a follower of Jesus, you are an Esther. Here's what I mean. Esther was meant to become queen to save her people. And you are who you are and where you are for a reason. It doesn't always feel that way. And I think sometimes we wonder that very question. Why am I here? What am I here for? You may even think, I don't even know if I want to be here. And I don't mean like here in this room. I do, but I also mean here in this world. And I can say without a doubt, you are who you are, and you are where you are, because that is God's purpose for you. He is going to call you. He's going to ask you to do something that requires courage. It's possible that God has put you in this place, in your circumstances, for such a time as this. All right, we're going to take a few minutes and we're going to do a little response here. But before we get up from our seats, I'll give you the instructions. Before we get up from our seats, I really just want you to put your head down. I want you to close your eyes, and I just want you to pray. I want you to ask God, why am I here? Why am I here? Here in my school, in this home, with this job, or on this team, here at Fusion, somewhere else, in your band, in your musical, your clubs. God, why do you have me here? Think about what he is calling you to do that requires courage. We're going to take a couple minutes and we're going to play some soft music. And over here in the dark, I have some paper and some pens. And so after you've had a few moments to just sit quietly and pray, I want you to just come on over when you're ready and just write down what you think that thing is. What is it? What is God calling you to that requires courage? Why does he have you here? Just write it down, and you're going to stick it in your pocket. You're going to take it with you. You're going to keep it. And I'll talk more about it after we do that. But don't rush. Don't rush this. Okay? When you're ready, just come on up. Write it down. Stick it in your pocket.